I'm Ulysses Arrow, and I'm back with another episode of Time Machine Toronto, which is the series where we take walks around the city and excavate all kinds of interesting things. We deconstruct, we reconstruct, we rediscover the city we think we know. Today, the walk begins at the Don Valley Brickworks, which is now also known as the Evergreen Brickworks. This was the burning belly of Toronto at one time. And hundreds of thousands of bricks were manufactured here to rebuild the city after the Great Fire of 1904, which devastated the downtown core. After that, we're going to go next door where there's a really interesting cliff, and it's a geological record of 450 million years of the Earth's history, including fossils from all those periods. So we're going to make our way through the Moore Park Ravine and up to Chorley Park, which is the Xanadu that Charles Foster Kane built. From there we're going to make our way, wind our way up to St. Clair and the Wiley Loring Park, which is a great sculpture garden with bronzes. And finally we're going to end up at Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which is my favorite cathedral in Toronto. And last stop, the Rose Hill Reservoir. If you're ready to have some fun, come with me, because I'm Ulysses Arrow. The Don Valley Brickworks began production in 1889 when the Taylor brothers discovered super high quality clay on their property when they were putting in fence posts. They quickly concluded that this could be a fantastic source for very high quality bricks, which it was. And for the following decades, this was one of the biggest brick making facilities in all of North America, with the biggest kilns. And the footprint of these kilns remains here. This is one of them. And a whole army of these would produce hundreds of thousands of bricks in a very short space of time. And they were used to rebuild and to build the city of Toronto. The cherry red was the famous color that came out of here, but there were other colors, including yellow, which for some reason Oscar Wilde, when he visited Toronto on his North American tour, found kind of humorous. I guess they didn't have those in London in those days. But the bricks built the city that we know today. They built Casa Loma, Osgoode Hall, the Ontario Legislature, and Chorley Park, which will be one of our stops along this walk. Now behind me is a large pond, man-made, with water lilies, bull thrushes. It's all been rehabilitated. This used to be a giant open pit clay mine, the source material for the giant brick production of the brickworks. And how it has changed. What I'm going to do now is take us over, because I've got an archaeological dig going on just over there where the clay cliffs are. Follow me. Follow Ulysses Arrow. excavation site is, where my dig is this summer. So come on up and have a look at some of the really cool discoveries that I've made. Oh, hey guys, you finally caught up. All right, pretty exciting stuff happening here. I'm on the site of my summer geological, archaeological excavation, and we're finding some pretty amazing stuff. We're at the top of the open pit clay mine that I was talking about earlier, and indeed this is the kind of clay that we're talking about, and that was used in the production of bricks. And for the past few days, well, let me backtrack a bit. 130,000 years ago, this was the shoreline of a giant inland tropical sea filled with all kinds of sea creatures and monsters. And on land, giant animals familiar to us today, but of a much greater size, like giant beavers that were 7 feet long, over 200 pounds, with teeth that were 6 inches long, for example. But what I am excavating here is something even more amazing, because I have found, it's finally coming loose here, the bone of a prehistoric flying dragon. That's right, a prehistoric flying dragon. And I know that to be the case because I've also found wing fragments from this dragon in that direction and this direction. Amazing, amazing find. And there's more beneath here, and oh, this, you won't believe what I just came across. Pirate treasure. Pirate treasure. Pieces. Yeah, pieces of 8. Buried here by pirates who roamed the Great Lakes in the 1700s and early 1800s. When the heat got too much for them in the Caribbean, they would hide out in the Great Lakes. But who would have thought that in my archaeological dig there would also be pirate treasure? Wow, wow, double bone, and oh, okay. Proof positive of pirates having been here. Bottles of rum. Pirate rum. You know what? I'm gonna see. Yeah, rum. Yeah. And it still tastes good. Wow, you guys have come on a really, really amazing day. Not only have I finally pulled this dragon bone out of the earth, which is a museum find, we have pirate pieces of 8 and rum. All right? Wow. Banner day. Stay tuned, because there's more coming from this excavation. I'd like to read a short selection from a short story by a Toronto author called The Hawk Who Came Down to Die. And it's partly about the brickworks in the early years, in the late 1800s. Toronto's always been a very rich city, but it's also always been a very poor city for some. And especially at that time, there was a large indigent and homeless population of people that were roaming the city, which was especially tough in winter. And this is what this passage captures. It was frozen winter. These people had no homes to come to, so they came to the brickworks because of the heat that came off this massive production in the kilns. And the foremen who worked there at the time would allow the people into the brickworks overnight to warm themselves by these kilns so they wouldn't freeze to death outside. Connolly took his pipe out of a dark blue coat made of horsehair and lit it. He looked over the bank of kilns that ran the length of the brickworks. They were still hot from the last shift, and the small mob of homeless bedded down beside them on the few possessions they owned. For the last 2 days, the mother had been running a high fever, and she was worried. Worried because if it did not break soon, she would need to seek help. Come spring, we'll be digging by the east gate, said Donnelly, sucking on his pipe. Makes no sense, said Hayden, a wiry man whose breath smelled of rotting vegetables. Still plenty of clay on the north quarry wall, which is where we work. Have ye not heard, said Donnelly, gesturing with his pipe in the direction of the factory's open pit mine. It had been dug out to make the first bricks to build the city on Lake Iroquois, and now it was big enough to swallow it back whole again. I've heard nothing, said Hayden. They've made a most remarkable discovery on the north wall over there, said Donnelly. The remains of a world 450 million years old. Fossils of undersea plants and creatures man has never seen. You don't say, said Hayden. I do say. There are treasures in that ancient clay that will make us the talk of the Chicago World Fair. I don't know, should I continue with this? I guess so. We've come this far. He emptied his pipe on the floor and walked over to the sleeping mob. The mother, holding her child, was in a warm place, but she still shivered. Donnelly looked at the mother, then he looked at the child, and the child looked back. No words were spoken. And minutes later, as Donnelly fixed himself a nice cup of hot tea in another part of the factory, the mother slumped back against a sack of clothes, still holding the child in her arms. The child was glad that at last her mother had found sleep. There were many hours before daybreak, and the child knew it would be a long, long sleep. Tears began to run down the child's face from the knowing and not knowing of the tragedy that had just happened. The mother expires holding her child. She dies in the brickworks. The hawk who came down to die. Here we are at Chorley Park, Government House, the residence of the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario and Upper Canada. It was a sprawling mansion modeled on the Renaissance French chateau of the Loire Valley, built between 1911 and 1915. A much more grand residence than Rideau Hall is in Ottawa, which is the home of the Governor General of Canada. But unfortunately, this historic plaque is all that remains of the former great house. It had a short life. During that short life, it infamously hosted Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson, the infamous Wallace Simpson, for whom Edward abdicated the throne. But it was entirely decommissioned by 1938, and the contents were sold for a paltry $18,000. Not long after that, in 1960, then Toronto Mayor Nathan Phillips bought Chorley Park for $100,000 in order to tear it down. It was believed that the upkeep of the great palace was too much. And yet this was the greatest residence castle ever built in Canada. It's another example of how the city of Toronto has no respect, little to no respect, for great heritage, to the detriment of everybody, because today to build something like Chorley Park would be in the many tens of millions of dollars. Impossible to finance. Chorley Park. Okay, we're crossing over the CN rail tracks here, separating South Summerhill, Bizarro World Summerhill, with North Summerhill, which is the real Midtown Summerhill. It's a very weird thing, separated by the CN railway tracks, and these street names kind of echo each other with no correspondence. Anyway, we're off again. Follow me, I'm Ulysses Arrow. Here we are at Loring-Wile's studio, just off Mount Pleasant Road, and this is a former, old-fashioned schoolhouse from the late 1800s, which they converted to sculptors, well-known Canadian sculptors, actually American transplants, but Canadian, who lived in this converted schoolhouse, converted into a studio in the first half of the 1900s. And they're of some renown. They created quite a number of public bronze sculptures, including some that are in the National Gallery in Ottawa. Now let's go and take a look at some of their sculptures at the Loring-Wyle Park. Follow me, I'm Ulysses Arrow. We're at the Loring-Wyle Sculpture Garden at the corner of St. Clair Avenue East and Mount Pleasant Road in Midtown Toronto. Francis Loring here and Wiley, we'll see here in a second, were Canadian artists and sculptors, actually transplants from the US, refugees from the US, who lived in the house just down the street here, spent most of their working years in this neighborhood. Renowned artists whose work, for example, is in the National Gallery in Ottawa. Here we have Wiley, Florence Wiley, the other of the pair. They were a kind of Gertrude Stein, Alice T. of Toronto, of their time, actually a contemporary time. And this garden is a really pretty great thing. Apart from being a green space, we have here two pretty great bronzes from Loring and Wiley. The first is the young girl from 1938 by Wiley. It's a work that I think would not look out of place at the Rodin Museum in Paris. A great piece of public art. And then over here is the second sculpture in the garden, and it's The Harvester. And also by Wiley from 1940. And it shows a harvester in the field in summer, drinking from a great jug of water, maybe wine, probably water. And terrific public art, not a lot like this in Toronto. This parquet was in fact a transit loop for the streetcar that used to run up and down Mount Pleasant Road. And sometime in the 60s, it was converted to a parquet. And then after that, a local community organization decided to dedicate the parquet to Loring-Wyle and add the sculptures to create this bronze sculpture garden. Great idea, great civic initiative, and it just goes to show you that if a community does get organized around a good public service objective, great things can happen. Loring-Wyle parquet. Okay, follow me. We've got two more stops. I'm Ulysses Arrow. Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Behind me here, over my shoulder. It's my favorite cathedral in Toronto. Probably because it's built in the Romanesque style, which is quite uncommon because most grand churches and cathedrals are in the Gothic style. The Romanesque style is much earlier, began in the 6th century. Really, Constantinople has some of the best examples. Maybe the best example of all is the Hagia Sophia, built by Emperor Constantine. Our Lady of Perpetual Help was opened in 1930, and it's been receiving worshippers ever since. Let's see if it's open. Actually, it is. Come and take a peek. This is actually really unusual because this door is normally firmly locked and it's only open during Sunday service. Our Lady of Perpetual Help is part of the Churches on the Hill ministry, which begins here on St. Clair East, goes to Yonge, and along St. Clair West. It's about 5 churches. Unfortunately, many of them are being converted into condos, mainly because the doors remain locked most of the time. Follow me, I'm Ulysses Arrow, and we have one last stop to make. Here we are at Rose Hill Reservoir, the last stop on our walk. It's been under construction, renovation for the past 100 years. Well, maybe not quite that long. Probably 4, but it was supposed to be done in 2. It's still not yet completely open. And it's yet another example of heritage being betrayed, because there was a great atom sculpture, a sculpture of an atom with electrons, kind of in the middle of the park with water basins around it. The water basins have been eradicated and the atomic sculpture has been shuffled off to the side, which is all a shame. But the reservoir is here, it's a good green space, and it does supply the water for a big section of Midtown Toronto around St. Clair, Summerhill, and Rosedale. This wraps up our walk for the day. I'm Ulysses Arrow, and I'll see you around.